Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. We're just a few moments after 12 p.m. Mountain Time, so we'll begin with getting your board engaged in the fundraising process.
Yes, we're really excited about this. This webinar is a part of the monthly series that we're doing as part of the Native CDFI Capital Access Initiative that some of y'all are participating in, which is funded by the Northwest Area Foundation. And so what's great about this webinar series is, again, all the topics discussed focus on different ways to grow your capacity to access capital. And so to get us prepared initially, Stephanie's going to share some information with you all about the GoToWebinar platform. And I always let everybody know that we're recording this webinar, so you'll be able to revisit it if you like to.
Great, thank you, Heather. We'll move on to the question and answer platform, or box in our webinar platform. If everyone could please answer the following question. What organization are you representing today? So I'll give you just a few moments to navigate your way to that area and just type in the organization you're representing. Awesome, I'm seeing some representation from Black Hills. We've got people from Talafund. Well, thank you all for logging in and participating. We're really excited about this webinar and very thankful for our panelists joining us. And now back to you, Heather.
Thanks, Stephanie. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lynell Smith, our very capable coworker here at OESTA. She's going to go through a quick presentation with y'all about kind of best practices around fundraising and keeping your board engaged. And then we're going to jump right into our panel discussion. So Lynell, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, can everyone hear us now? Okay, great. Sorry about that, just some technical difficulties. We're back on the line and we're so glad you can hear us. So I'll turn it back over to Lynell, who will introduce our speakers.
Okay, great. So gotta love tech issues, right? So this is Lynell Smith. I'm the program manager here at First Nations OESTA, so I'll be facilitating the panelists on today's webinar. And we have Fern Ori from Wisconsin Native Loan Fund, Bill Beeson he's a board member from Wisconsin Native Loan Fund. We have Sarah Echohawk from ACES, and then Michelle Kahane from Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, and they'll do a little more in-depth introductions when we get to the panelist portion. But what we also wanted to do today was kind of give you the framework as we're talking about fundraising and give you some best practices, things that to consider in building out your participation with your board on your fundraising practices. So one board role, as you know, boards have tons of different roles within the organization, and one of the functions that they have is to assist in fundraising, or maybe they're tasked with doing the fundraising completely. So some of the board best practices is to provide board training. And this is really helpful because it helps them understand what a CDFI does and how it works, and getting some feedback of the overall industry and what some of the needs and common pitfalls are. You learn about where the organization is financially and some of the areas where they may need additional fundraising assistance. And then they also understand the responsibilities and how to manage that risk. The board will also help with strategic planning. Generally, they're the governing body of the organization, so they provide like the overarching big picture vision of the organization. And that's really done through the strategic planning. So they have this roadmap that's developed over generally 3 to 5 years. Some organizations go a little longer than that. But the benefit to having a strategic plan is that it helps keep the board updated and focused to what the primary objectives are for the organization over the next 3 to 5 years. And it gives the staff that focus as well, because when you're running a nonprofit or a CDFI, you tend to have a million things to do. We become jack of all trades. So having a strategic plan will give the staff that focus to where they'll prioritize on what are some of the objectives of the organization and moving it forward. And then it also provides a tool for the board to evaluate the executive director, because they have objectives and measurables that they need to meet within a certain time frame. It just becomes a really effective management tool for the ED as well as the board to evaluate the ED. So let's just do a quick poll here, and this is our board engagement poll. So how engaged do you feel your board is at this point in time?
We'll give just a few more moments for people to cast their votes. We have about 75% of you who've responded, so just a few more seconds. Okay, great. We have about 15% say very, 46% say moderately, and 38% say not really.
Okay, great. So, and that's pretty common within a lot of nonprofits and native CDFIs, is that it's one of the challenges to get the board a little more involved in fundraising, and it looks to be reflective of the poll. So, and we're gonna talk a little bit about some ways to re-engage your board, and as well as getting some direct feedback from our panelists. So through board engagement, one of the things that we talked about too was like orientating new board members through a formal board orientation. And this is very helpful, not only for the staff of the organization, but to bring on new board members so they can kind of hit the ground running. They'll feel a little more confident in the knowledge of the organization, where they are financially, what are the programs that they offer, what is the loan fund currently at, how are they lending. So that's very helpful to orientate your new board members on all of the things that I just mentioned. It helps deliver effective board communication as well. So any questions can be done through maybe an ad hoc orientation committee, or you assign one board member to kind of be the lead on providing information to the newer board members. It increases the ability for those new board members to focus their meetings on strategy, rather than having to go back and get history on projects being presented or reports being presented. They're pretty much up to speed. And it gives them the ability to have those candid discussions with the executive director or with other board members that are in charge of the orientation process. You can also review and reassign committee duties. As you're bringing on new board members, it's always good to get them involved in the committees. So once they understand the different committees and the structure of the organization, they can either choose a committee by choice or in their current expertise and strengths where they would best be suited. Then you would also be able to provide education opportunities for the board members. So through that orientation, you generally have a pretty good idea of the skill and expertise that they will be bringing to the board. But if there's an area of interest that they're providing to you through those discussions, it would be a great opportunity for them to build out that skill set and providing that education opportunity. And it's also great to give the recognition. Everybody likes to get a pat on the back for good things that they're doing with the board. Same thing with your board members. Another board role, fundraising tied in with capitalization. So if you're a loan fund, capitalization is super important. So board members are responsible for helping the organization reach those goals. And then they capitalize, and the capitalization and fundraising are ongoing endeavors for CDFIs, and then capitalization increases donor confidence and invites greater investment. So it's really important to have the support of your board members as you're reaching out and building partnerships and networking, because a huge part of fundraising is really the relationship building aspect. Do you have anything to add, Heather?
Yeah, that's completely true. I mean, like we kind of note here, although, you know, we're saying you're not necessarily having to have direct financial support that other nonprofits and some CDFIs do. I mean, we notice across the Native CDFI industry that's not really the case. And so, I mean, there's still plenty that can be done in terms of contributing to fundraising that's not like monetary. And like Lynelle was saying, it's all about kind of that relationship building and really supporting and promoting the organization, which is why we were kind of talking about that other piece earlier with having a really good knowledge of the organization and what it's doing and how it's lending, so that you can really make that fundraising case when you're networking with people. And then additionally with the capitalization planning, we kind of say that like the challenges with capitalization are really different just depending on the type of the CDFI. Like CDFI banks and credit unions obviously can capitalize through deposits from their members, where most of y'all are nonprofit CDFI loan funds and you don't really have this ability. So regardless, you know, there are really a lot of different things that you want to consider as part of your capitalization planning process. And we're going to kind of go through a couple of those really briefly.
So there's different ways that you can capitalize your loan fund. So there's different types of capital out there. So when you consider debt, there are EQ2s, there are PRIs, we have equity capital, grant funding, and donations. So your capitalization plan, we encourage that it's pretty diverse, so you're hitting different aspects of where you're getting your money for operations or capitalization. And then there's a great resource on the CDFI Fund website, and we do have the link there, the CDFI Capitalization Resource Bank. And then under the different sources of capital, there's really a wide range of sources through which the CDFIs can access various types of capital, including like the individual donors and investors. You can look at foundations, banks, and corporations, as well as local, state, and federal governments. The success of the CDFI's capitalization and fundraising efforts are really largely dependent upon the efforts of the organization's board and their executive team, which is a lot of times your executive director. As such, it's really important to make sure that the board and the executive team are thoroughly engaged and on board with the process and have the ability to successfully tap their personal as well as their professional networks to build these relationships with funders. Like we said earlier, that's probably one of the biggest things, is that cold calling and requesting for funds can only go so far, but to develop that relationship to where you're in line with their mission funding, and and then they really get to know the organization and all the great work that you guys are doing, and that generally happens over time, so you're not able to have a 1-hour meeting and share all these great things that you're doing and really have this deep relationship. It's going to be after several meetings. So I've worked with organizations where a person that just does that, and sometimes the benefit is 2 years later when they get a huge investment into the organization. So part of that is really the planning for it. So developing a really strong story and knowing your organizational history, having that documented and in a pitch book is really helpful too, because you have pictures, you have a synopsis of what the organization does, you have some successes listed, and as well as some measurable things, that the amount of loans that you've done, the community that you're serving. But you as a board can do a lot, but you're not going to do it alone. So a lot of times you tap into the different expertise within the board. You can develop a committee that will kind of work on a fundraising plan, or you can round robin with the ED and everybody kind of gets the experience as well. But the staff must facilitate your campaign. But most prospects don't want to be solicited by junior staff, and that's a really important thing. Even here with First Nations of WISTA, a lot of our fundraising efforts are done by the executive director, because a lot of the foundations, even donors, would like to have that conversation with your executive staff. So just keep that in mind. So a lot of it does fall back on the executive director, and then generally a lot of the board officers as well. Okay, so we have another fundraising poll question, and this one is, how do you and your board feel about fundraising?
Okay, great. We'll close it in just a few seconds, so cast your last votes. Okay, it looks like we have 0% say feel great, 62 feel okay, 8% say terrified, 23% say they don't think about it, and 8% say don't do it.
That's well, it's sad to see that nobody feels great about it, but it's not uncommon. Fundraising is a tough issue, and it's difficult for some boards to kind of get that expertise nailed down to where you feel great about asking for money. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the best practices in that.
Yeah, so kind of what we want to talk about too with best practices is that just kind of acknowledging that most board members and even staff too are going to feel pretty nervous and awkward about fundraising, because they initially think about it as like asking for money. But we kind of, just to jump down, we say fundraising really is more than asking for money. And before you start, you really want to be committed and excited about the organization, and it really begins with engagement, which is why having that board staff engagement is so critical with fundraising, so everybody's on the same page, everybody's excited, everybody feels like it's possible. And again, it goes again into that knowledge about the organization so that you can really project all of the really great things you're doing and really get potential funders excited about the organization as well. And then another really good thing to keep in mind is don't necessarily wait until you're in a crisis to fundraise. Like, you should be fundraising kind of all the time, even though, I mean, I know we all wear 50 different hats and it's really hard to kind of allocate the time to do it, but at least kind of having it as a strategic goal kind of throughout your operations is key. You don't want to wait till you're like, we have 6 months till we're shutting our doors. That's not, you know, you have that, it's kind of too much pressure to put on the fundraising then at that point, and you're kind of not going to really be able to look at it in a thoughtful way, and as part of a relationship building, it's going to be very much a money grab then, and it's not going to be quite as effective. So you really want to have it built in as like a thoughtful part of your strategy, not in kind of a crisis mode.
And so for those of you that said you were terrified or not feeling too comfortable or not very confident about the fundraising process, or maybe your board feels that way, it's like Heather said, it's not about asking for money. So there's a lot of things that your board members can do that don't entail making the ask. So one of the things that you can do is make friends for the cause. So really capitalizing on your social networks that each of your board members have. So they may be tied in with a program officer from another organization or foundation that has a like-minded mission as yours, and so you may be able to build that relationship. And it could even result in in-kind services, maybe sponsoring a fundraiser in conjunction with theirs, so really capitalizing on those networks. And then identifying the organization's VIP friends. So who are important people that could affect the organization's future, who should be on your radar? So you want to look at VIPs as very important prospects for the organization, and that can just be compiling a list. So if one of your board members can identify these VIP friends, that's a task that they can do that takes the administrative burden off of staff. And then advice visits. So, and this is a low pressure kind of one-on-one meeting where you introduce yourself and the organization, and you ask for advice on different aspects of the organization, whatever you're seeking. So the only goal in this advice visit is to ask them what they think of the project and organization, and ask for some serious guidance on how to either grow a program or expand a loan fund, or maybe you're looking at expanding your market and you establish that relationship by requesting guidance and advice from these individuals. So that helps with the relationship building. And then gather friends with through small socials, or host tours of the organization. That's a really great way to get people kind of involved with your organization when they actually see the work that's being done and they see the community that you're serving. So you can do that with, and that can generally be low cost, cheese and crackers kind of visit where they get to meet staff and maybe meet some of your potential customers, and then you get to take them around the reservation or the community that you're serving. Another way is to acknowledge donor generosity, and that can be through a breakfast, a luncheon, or maybe it's even sending notes on a regular basis to people that have contributed to the organization. So having that acknowledgement is really important, because when they give the time and effort to fund your organization or do a monetary donation or even time, you want to make sure that you send that acknowledgement for their generosity.
And that goes into the relationship building too, because again, it's not just a one-off. Like, you want it to be a long-term kind of relationship and potentially like future fundraising prospect as well. So really acknowledging that generosity goes a long way with people.
Most definitely. And so I hope that was helpful information, kind of gave you some framework on some best practices with fundraising and how to get your board a little more involved if they're not currently. But we're going to hear from some really great panelists on what's working in their communities and how they've worked with their boards. And we even have a board member. But the great thing too is that our panelists have served on other boards, so they can talk from both sides, as the organization and as a board member. Okay. So let's start our panel discussion with some introductions to your organization. So if you would describe your organization, the role within your organization, and we'll start with Fern.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fern Orey. I'm the CEO of the Wisconsin Native Loan Fund, and we have an awesome board that has evolved over time as we grew our target market and went statewide with our loan fund. We cultivated a board that was going to represent every reservation, and we have, I believe, 8 out of the 11 reservations in our state represented on our board. So I think it's been very key and strategic for our organization to have this as our leadership, and we have Bill Beeson on the line today as well, representing our board on behalf of 2 organizations. But I am so happy to be part of this panelist.
Thank you, Fern. And Bill?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bill Bison. As Fern said, I am the board chairman of Wisconsin Native Loan Fund, and I'm also the vice chairman of First American Capital Corp., which is another Native CDFI located in the Milwaukee area. So I serve on 2 of the 4 Native CDFIs in Wisconsin, and as Fern had alluded, our board has evolved a lot. I've been on it about 4 years, and I'll wait till we get into some of the questions here. But Fern is right on. Our board has evolved so much from where it started. We don't have any board members there anymore that are name only. But again, I'll wait till we get into the specific questions, and I'll elaborate on that.
Thank you, Bill. Sarah?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. This is Sarah Ekelwalk. I'm the CEO of ACES, which is the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. Glad to be on the call today and talking about this. Previously, I worked for First Nations Development Institute for a number of years in the American Indian College Fund, so I've been fundraising for almost 20 years now. And in addition to that, I serve on 3 other Native organizations on the board, and I am the chair of one of those. So this is a topic that I work with every day, so happy to try to help however I can.
Thank you, Sarah. And last, we have Michelle. Hi, Michelle. I think you might be on mute.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Okay.
Okay, sorry. Good morning. Michelle Culhoney. I'm the president and CEO at the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. The council is a statewide and national network of over 120 Native Hawaiian organizations supporting just about every facet of community development in the Hawaiian community. We are a community loan fund, and due to the size of our membership, we have a rather large board. We're governed by a 21-member board representing various facets of our community as well as the various islands, because we're stretched over 8 Hawaiian islands and not always connected physically. So we have a large board, very active. Heather, I appreciate your comment and your excitement around being thoughtful about fundraising, because I will say that our board definitely contributes financially, but also in so many other ways to help capitalization or to make capitalization possible for our CDFI.
Thank you, Michelle. So let's go ahead and roll on into our questions. I know a lot of people are excited to hear from you. So Michelle, we'll start with you. So what do you think contributes to your organization's engagement between the executive director and the board, and how does that help them work together to fundraise?
I would say that for us, one of the critical pieces I think that was shared earlier on in your presentation, in terms of contributing to engagement, rather than panicking to have to raise money, we have a process and a very specific product that we call Hawaiian Way Fund, which is our way for the board to simply engage with and interact with me or other members of the CNHA staff. And it's really a tool and a mechanism that we use. I think many folks are familiar with United Way or workplace giving and donor contributions. We have built a system and a process where our board members can either help us by giving or getting, and in getting, they help to promote our Hawaiian Way Fund product to their friends and colleagues, where we can go out with our board members and their help in doing a presentation to share this product so that we can raise corporate philanthropic giving by individual donors in their workplace to give to Hawaiian Way Fund to help capitalize our loan fund. And so for us, that has been, our founder created a beautiful tool, a car for us to drive around. I will admit that sometimes we keep the car parked in the garage because we could be better at getting that out, but it really has been a remarkable tool to help us to raise both individual donors and to have a tool for corporate donor, corporate giving to help capitalize the loan fund.
That's great, Michelle. Very innovative, definitely. And Bill, how do you work with the executive director to fundraise?
Yeah, first off, all great bullet points on the PowerPoint because they're spot on. I'm going to put a little different twist on this. You know, based on these poll results, you know, where you get 15% responded that their board is very engaged, that's a problem. You've got 85% of our native CDFIs that say their board is not engaged. If your board is not engaged, you know, that's something, and again, our board has evolved greatly. We had a lot of name-only people on there that didn't even know what the acronym CDFI stands for, didn't know what minimum prudent standards is, had no idea what the CDFI industry is. But we've changed that. It's taken some time, you know, but I think a lot of people, and it's obviously by the poll results and my interaction with the various native CDFIs over the past several years in the leadership journey, BNCSI, you know, and seeing some leaders within the native CDFI industry, it's a problem. You know, I take my board responsibility very seriously. I think I have a fiduciary duty to do so. But you know, if you can't talk the same language with your executive team, whether it's your executive director, your CEO, president, whatever it is, you know, it's hard to understand, you know, the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. So again, you know, I think it's the responsibility of the board members to get involved in the organization, participate in professional development. You know, and I know that's sometimes it's difficult. Most board members have their own full-time gigs and may not have the flexibility to, you know, attend various trainings and capacity building events. But, you know, I think that's, as the executive team looks at adding new board members, I think that's something that the native CDFIs really need to look at ahead of time. You know, is this particular person, you know, we all want to help the native communities. You know, we're all for the same cause. But can we really make a difference by being a board member with our various other duties, you know, that we have, whether it be professional, family, whatever the case may be. But, you know, I think it's an obligation. If you accept a board member position, you're going to get engaged because you have to. Because if you can help your leadership team in not only the fundraising, but just the day-to-day operations. I mean, I think we all know from a native CDFI standpoint, getting operating capital, you know, that's a challenge for all of us. We get loan capital, yeah, whether it's equity or loans, whatever. But, you know, unless you really understand the day-to-day challenges that the boots on the ground people have, you know, and again, you know, the poll results reflect that.
That's very correct, Bill, and I'm glad you brought that up in regard to recruitment. A lot of CDFI, sometimes when you're in the startup mode, you're grabbing anybody and everybody that kind of wants to be a part of the CDFI. But as your organization grows, then you become a little more strategic about looking at skills and expertise and kind of building a board that's going to be best for the organization and bringing in certain skill sets and people that do have the time and background and are motivated to really move the direction of fundraising. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So let's go to the next question. And how well do the executive director and board work together to fundraise? And we'll go to Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Well, first, from the organization, from ACES, where I serve as the CEO, from that perspective, the board and the executive director, we work well, and that's primarily because we set expectations up front with the board and let them know that there is an annual board fundraising commitment. So essentially an amount that the board commits to as its fundraising goal, and then I, along with our Director of Business and Program Development, work with the board to develop the strategy for reaching that goal. And that includes a little bit of fundraising training that we provide at the annual meeting to make the board a little more comfortable with the kind of fundraising we do, and most of that is approaching corporations. That's where the majority of the funding comes from. And then providing them a script and information in terms of who we see we could benefit from having the board contact and help them reach their fundraising goal. So for this year, the board fundraising goal is $50,000. And so we work closely with them in establishing the plan to do that. But we, at the organization, we actually provide them like the contact information, the background, who they're going to approach and how they're going to do it. So we really support them through that process. It's not where we just kind of say, okay, that's your goal, and now the board has to go figure out how to do that. And I think the other part, again, is just being very upfront when people are joining the board that that is an expectation. Because a lot of people come on the board because they want to help and they want to volunteer and they want to support the organization, but they may not have a lot of fundraising experience and may not be comfortable doing that. So I think you have to be clear that that's an expectation up front. So I'll stop there because I know we've got other questions, unless you want me to speak about it from the other organizations that I work from, work as a board member. Be happy to share that.
Yes, Sarah, go ahead and share.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize all the time. So for the other organizations that I work for, I'll think of one that's a smaller organization, and I think on there the board really is a resource. It's kind of the reverse because it's a really small staff, and the board is the one that has more of the fundraising connections, and that was deliberate by the organization, is to try to have a board that has those connections. Then the board also drives the fundraising in that respect at the monthly board meetings, talking about prospects, discussing who they can engage with, and going out and making those contacts and then helping bring those back to the organization. And then also, of course, being very involved in the budget and monthly financials of the organization. So really in that respect, I know the reason that we were approached, me and other board members for this particular board, was because we had some of those connections and could help make those introductions. So certainly I think, it can go both ways, where you can have board members who can be trained and encouraged along to help with the fundraising, or you can go out and seek out people who actually have that experience.
That's great, Sarah. I appreciate your comments. And you brought up an excellent point that kind of serves the CDFI world because, or the native CDFIs, they're generally small staffed and the board has to take on a larger role in fundraising. Exactly. If you do have a larger organization and a really active board, a lot of times then the staff take on the fundraising capabilities. Most definitely. Thank you for your comments. Sure. Fern, do you want to add anything?
I just wanted to just touch on a couple points that I think was also in the PowerPoint, and just those clear lines of open communication where the board is clearly understanding the vision and the mission, and they're totally bought into all of that of the organization. They support that. They're supportive of the staff. There's that working environment of strategic planning and understanding where we're going with the organization and having everybody able to recite that if necessary, as far as elevator pitches and things like that, having our board members engaged and in the right environment, taking them to events and meetings, having them represent the company along your side into a tribal council meeting, for example. things like that that really gets people engaged, and having that board really understand the environment that we're working in to capitalize and fundraise for the company, understanding the barriers and the challenges that we're facing as staff, and trying to get investments or do things like do a NACA compliance report, just different things where we're a team, and I know that that's what our board does. They're engaged, they're helpful, they understand the opportunities that are out there, the climate we're working in, and they are there to assist and learn as we go as well.
Thank you, Fern. Appreciate that. Let's go on to the next question, and I'll leave this open to any of the panelists. So what are some board-related funding challenges?
This is Bill, and I'm kind of repeating myself, but you know, like I said earlier, operating capital. You know, to continue doing the good things and grow the good things that we're doing in Indian country, it takes people, and people take money. So you know, the operating cash, you know, the unrestricted operating cash has been a challenge since my first day on the board of a native CDFI back in 2002. Because again, people take money. You know, if we're going to continue to make a difference in Indian country, you know, we got a two-person shop at Wisconsin Native Loan Fund, and the reduction that they do is incredible. It's just incredible. But you know, in order for us to continue growing our organization, you know, and really truly be that statewide organization, which we're making great progress on doing so, you know, that takes people. And so that's one of our biggest funding challenges, and I think we've been able to send a good message to our various funders over the past 3 years because our growth has been phenomenal. You know, so they're starting to get it, you know, that, okay, well, you know, there's rent to pay, there's utility, there's office supplies. You know, it's not all about loan capital. But, you know, it's going to take a while, you know, where we get to that self-sufficiency ratio of being able to just rely on, you know, our generated income, you know, to cover all of our operating expenses. Because like most native CDFIs, our self-sufficiency ratio, you know, is low. But that's one of our strategic plans is how do we grow that? Well, how do we grow that is by expanding our presence, but again, it takes people. So from a board standpoint, you know, that's always something that I'm very cognizant of. You know, what's our burn rate? You know, how many months of operating capital do we have before we need to, you know, I don't want to say we're in crisis mode, but really let's start looking at, okay, you know, how are we going to cover the salaries? How are we going to cover, you know, all of our general day-to-day operating expenses? So that's probably from my perspective as board chairman. It's always something I'm cognizant of is, you know, okay, how many months of operating capital do we have? And, you know, what are additional sources of doing that? And that's our biggest challenge when it comes to funding. You know, like I said earlier, we can get loan capital. That's not a problem. We can get all loan capital that we need, but we need to keep the lights on.
Thank you, Bill. Yes, operational funding is definitely a challenge with our native CDFIs and nonprofit organizations. Thank you. Do we have another panelist that would like to comment on board-related funding challenges? Sarah, I know you've served on several boards. Do you see some common challenges on the different boards that you've worked with?
Yeah, well, yeah, I've seen a lot of challenges, definitely. So on the boards that I work on, I think one of the challenges, and I don't know if this is something that others run, is certainly in Indian country, a lot of us wear a lot of different hats, and so we may be on different boards or working and serving and volunteering in different organizations. And so sometimes it's challenging because some of the funders that you're trying to work with or solicit funding from, you may be doing that from multiple organizations. And I think that needs to be talked about and discussed, and not necessarily that it's a conflict of interest, but to make it clear or disclose who else that you may be working on and what other organizations you might be working with to raise money, and then perhaps thinking if there's another contact who can then take that on. Because I do think it becomes complex if you're working with one, say a foundation, raising money for multiple organizations. That can get tricky because sometimes there may be decisions or information that you're privy to that that you would need to share across organizations, and it's that can be tough. So usually when that happens, we have a a frank discussion and decide who then else could maybe take on that particular relationship, and maybe you make the introduction and transfer the relationship. So I don't know how helpful that is, but I've certainly had that happen on all 3 of the boards that I serve on.
So now this is Michelle. I would echo and agree to that is a challenge, because many of the active board members that we want on our board, they do wear many different hats, and so that probably warrants some discussion. I think that we have a unique situation somewhat at CNHA, which is similar to that challenge, in that most of our board members are executive directors of organizations that they run, which might not be CDFIs, but they're also facing the challenge of fundraising for their own organization. And so one of the ways we have tried to figure out to work around that, and how do we raise money for the loan fund, particularly around operations, is constantly reminding our board and having the conversation of what we're fundraising for. Taking away the hesitation of asking for money for specific orgs, but asking for money for specific needs, that we are funding construction loans for low-income Native Hawaiian families who have no access to capital in our homestead communities. We are funding energy efficiency upgrades for low-income families who are getting left behind and off the grid as Hawaii moves into a clean energy environment. So really creating campaigns and funding ways to contribute. And again, speaking to the struggle of operational funds, creating fundraising campaigns around issue, around a specific purpose, so that individual donors can give unrestricted operating capital. I think that we don't think enough about the power of individual donors and unrestricted capital. And once we can raise unrestricted capital, our grant then becomes so much stronger, because you have so many individual donors giving. Again, why Hawaiian Way Fund has been helpful. But I think that it can be replicated without having an actual product, but creating fundraising campaigns around issues.
Thank you, Michelle and Sarah, for your comments. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next question. And this is posed to, we do have our one board member from Wisconsin Native Loan Fund, but any of the panelists can chime in as well, as since you do serve on other boards. So how do you feel as a board member seeking funding for the organization and making that ask for funds? Bill?
Yeah, I'm completely comfortable doing that. Other than the NACA fund, our largest source of investment has been the Lackawanna Tribe, which I'm a tribal member of. I've gone to 2 or 3 different council meetings with Fern, as well as on my own, saying, look, we're doing good things here. And, the thing, so again, I'm completely comfortable doing it, because a lot of tribes, you'll get a tribal member that needs a loan for whatever the case may be, and they'll go to tribal council and they'll ask for the funds. Well, as we know, in the Indian country, whether you get approved or denied depends on your last name. So what we're doing at Wisconsin Native Loan Fund is we're making merit-based credit decisions. It doesn't matter what your last name is. If it's a good deal, we're going to fund your loan request. So I'm completely comfortable doing that, and I'm completely comfortable doing it with any of the other 10 tribes within Wisconsin, because we're doing great things. We've secured funding from 4 of the 11 tribes in Wisconsin. So we got more work to do, but we've got a third of the tribes in Wisconsin that believe in what we're trying to do. But Fern makes my job easy. She's a rock star. She understands what we're trying to accomplish. I support her 100% of the time. So it makes it easy for me to go to a tribe or another funding source and tell them the great things that we're doing. And so I'm completely comfortable doing that. But again, I'm not patting myself on the back by any means. I'm an engaged board member. I understand this industry. I understand Indian country. So I'm very comfortable doing it. So with the participants that are on this call, as you're looking at your board composition, really think about that. Think about the long-term implications, because you don't need any people that are there in name only. They could be comfortable going before any tribal council, any funding source, and saying, look, we're doing great things. We need your support.
Thank you, Bill. And your confidence in making that ask is really reflective of how well you work with your executive director and how engaged you are by getting the information that you need. You understand the demographic, you understand what the program's about, and you I'm sure, have success stories as well. So that's where we want to kind of get some feedback from our panelists on what's worked really well within your communities, with your board and your executive director. And we'll start with Fern.
I think that the way that we've cultivated this board to be fully representative of the whole state and all of our reservations, I think that that's been a big success, and it's actually just the start of what that success is going to show by having carefully cultivated individuals serving on our board, representing each tribe, understanding our company and our mission and vision and what we're doing in Wisconsin, and really boosting Native Americans' access to capital and education behind all that. To me, that's the success that we're just starting to even just tap into. We have these people strategically on our board that are able to go back to their communities, their family members, their tribal councils, and continue marketing what we do, continue sharing the access to the loans that we provide, the financial education programming that we have available, and then to also create those connections and those networks. Like Bill mentioned, we have a third of the Wisconsin tribes have invested in us, and that's just the start. And a lot of this is through our board and our connections that we've made in that respect. And that just trickles all the way down to balance sheets, clients served, families that have created and built more capacity, increased credit scores. We all know, how it's all intertwined. So to me, that's the biggest success is having that board really has brought this company to the next level.
Thank you, Fern. And your points are really right on, because your success stories really create that motivation and buy-in to your organization. So when funders or people you're just relationship building hear about the great things you're doing, it really helps get them to the feel of the organization, and thus the relationship is strengthened and deepened through that. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next. I think this is one of our last questions, and I'd like to hear from each panelist. And we want to hear, what is your #1 tip for board fundraising? And we will start with Michelle.
My #1 tip for board fundraising, I guess I will share one of the biggest successes I think that CNHA has this year, and it was really around strengthening relationship between our board and a foundation, national foundation funder, and in that relationship, in having our board intimately get to know a funder who made a 5-year commitment to CNHA. Interestingly, they challenged the funder, understanding the challenges of operational support, and said, if we are able to leverage your funds by raising X amount of dollars, will you offer the organization a bonus? I laughed at first, thinking there's no way, but it really happened. So we got a 5-year funding commitment from a national foundation, and it says that if we raise up to an additional $100,000 within that 5-year period, that they will match it. And I think that that was an awesome demonstration of direct engagement by our board, creating a personal relationship with this foundation, and really just thinking outside of the box, asking for something that I probably wouldn't have asked for myself.
That's great, Michelle. Bill, what is your #1 tip for board fundraising?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but your board needs to be students of the industry to support your executive team when you're trying to fundraise, because that donor confidence, as you had mentioned in the slide before, that is so critical. I don't know, who makes up your board? Do they know what you're trying to do? Do they support you? Do they understand the operational challenges that you have on a day-to-day basis? Do they understand the good things that you're trying to accomplish to your target market? So, professional development of your board is critical. Again, I've been doing this a while. Maybe I have a little advantage, and but I've actually worked in the CDFI world, so I understand that from a standpoint. But it's really about your board composition. You mentioned it earlier. People are yeah, they'll jump on board. Yeah, I can be a board member, but and that's really about it. They're there in name only. You need to be engaged to support your executive team, because that's the only way that the organization is going to grow. So that board composition, that I think that's the #1 tip for board fundraising. Again, we've made great strides in our board composition. We've got very, very, very good board members on board that are familiar with the CDFI industry, are respected within their communities, and that's been, that's really the #1 tip from a board perspective, is board composition.
Thank you, Bill, and I'd like to hear from Sarah.
Yeah, I think kind of along with what Bill was saying is that there needs to be clear expectations about what is required in terms of board fundraising, and that needs to be clear on both sides, so that there's no question about kind of what is involved. So, as to Bill's point, having engaged board members, but they need to know what it is that they're committed to doing, and they need to have assistance in getting there, regardless of whether it's a small organization or not. We have to have that continuous dialogue with the executive director for the board the boards that I serve on, and just be clear about what is the expectation. And again, I think that's most helpful when people are coming onto the board before they actually join the board, that they're clear that that's going to be an expectation and what that involves, so that they can make the decision then if they're ready to commit to do that.
Yep, great point. I mean, a commitment needs to be made up front.
Absolutely. And lastly, we'll hear from Fern.
Well, obviously, everything that everyone has stated has been wonderful, great #1 tips. And along with all of that, all I can stress is educating your boards as much as possible on minimum prudence standards, on what types of funders and investors you're looking for, the environment that you're working in, the barriers, the challenges, the opportunities at hand, having them participate as well. If there's any opportunity, I think that was pivotal for us, is the ability for not just staff, but board as well, to be able to participate in something like the Leadership Journey cohort or the BNCSI, Building Native Capacity for CDFI Sustainability. Things like that that really gets board and staff all on the same page, getting critical, practical, hands-on resources and tools and education. I think that those are all things that have assisted our organization tremendously. But I do agree with Bill, 100% composition of your board is probably the #1 thing in getting key board fundraising ideas across the page, and along with managing and leading that organization in every respect.
Thank you, Fern. Appreciate it. And so we do actually have a question that was posed in the chat box that we want to address before we wrap up here.
Okay, the question is, how do we connect with donors that and engage with them while staying in tune with who we are as Native? And then they ask, they have an example of that in the Yakama Nation, there's no word in the language for thank you, and to say thank you seems to contradict who they are. And is there a way to go about that with donors without compromising? And they ask, does anyone else struggle with that? And are there any suggestions?
So have any of our panelists come across that issue?
No, you know, and Bill, and this is Bill. I quite frankly, I don't understand the question. How can you not be grateful to a donor? In our native language, it's miigwech. Thank you. You know, so I really don't understand the question.
Anyone else? Sarah?
My audio cut out. Can you repeat the question?
The question is, how do we connect with donors that will be engaging with them while staying true to who we are as Natives?
Ah, yes. You know, it all depends on who you're talking about and who the donor is, but I think certainly any conversation that you have with a donor when you're first working with them, I think you have to be very upfront about your values as an organization and incorporate that into the discussion. And that is not always easy to do. And sometimes, certainly I've come across situations, especially working for ACES, because we have a lot of corporate donors, where it's taken a lot longer to develop a relationship and for them to understand how we do things and how we do things differently than other organizations that they're used to working for, or working with, I should say. And quite frankly, we even have some corporations that won't work with ACES. And we've had to make that decision and make that choice and be okay with that, because, as you know, I think to Bill said, you know, we do have to be true to our values. I think what's important is to be clear about that, and we actually have a values statement that we use, and I'd be happy to share that. I'm sure others have those as well. But in addition to our mission and our vision, we also talk about our strategies and our values and how we work within those values, and we stay committed to those, and we share those broadly. So I don't know if that was helpful, but that's how we do it.
Most definitely, Sarah. Thank you for responding to that.
Yeah. Sorry, this
Go
is
ahead.
Michelle. I would also say, in terms of that conflict, that we also have the opportunity to look at fundraising as a way to help connect everyday individuals to the power of your culture. That you have an opportunity to mobilize donor opportunities to support your culture, your tradition, and your knowledge, and to share that it is because of those things that drive many of our organizations and are at the core, are adopted as our core values, and really we can turn that around to use this as an opportunity to share our core values
and to have donors who would contribute to the power of our culture. I think that it's a powerful statement, and definitely the possibility exists.
Thank you, Michelle. And we do have one last question that'll kind of wrap up the Q&A portion here. We did have a question that Stephanie will.
So one person asked, are your thoughts around, they have a board that is asking for compensation for their time, and they have board members and volunteers. So they're just asking if the panelists have any thoughts around that, having board members asking for compensation.
Well, at Wisconsin Native Loan Fund, because we're really trying to grow the organization, it's stated up front, that, hey, we can cover your travel expenses, and if we have our annual meeting, we'd really like you to attend in person, so we can cover, your lodging expense. But, this isn't tribal council. There's no stipends. You're in this to help the organization grow. Hopefully, at some point in time, when we get to our goal of having a $5–10 million loan fund and we're 100% self-sufficient, hey, yeah, maybe we can compensate the board, for reasonable expenses. But at this stage of the game, we're a small shop, we're a growing organization, and the same thing is true for First American Capital Corp. There is no board compensation at this point. We need you as board members to be engaged to help us grow to that scale. And at that point in time, maybe we'll be able to offer something, reasonable, that does not affect the operating budget of the organization.
Thank you, Bill.
This is Sarah. I'm sorry, I have to run, but I'd like to weigh in on this one a little bit. Again, I think this, and again, Bill was kind of talking about this, goes back to that expectations about up front when people join the board. You should be very clear ahead of time whether or not what your policy is. Do you expect board members to pay all of their expenses, including their travel? Do you compensate for that? Or what's the travel requirements for a board member? Are you willing to compensate them? Is that something that the organization does? You can do that as a nonprofit, but it gets a little tricky, and then you've got to be issuing 1099 forms if you're actually going to be compensating board members. So, I would tend to stay away from that other than maybe direct reimbursement of expenses. And again, I would be very clear up front about what the expectation is. So I'm trying to think, all three of the boards that I belong to, the expectation is that the board members cover their own expense. And if they have an exception where they can't cover their expense, then they have to request from the organization kind of like a waiver, and then the organization will cover the expense for the travel. But it's very clear up front when you join that that's kind of the way they operate, if you will.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate your comments to that. And before we wrap up here, I just want to give a big thank you to our panelists, Fern, Bill, Sarah, Michelle. Thank you for your time and for joining us today. For the and we'll have Heather close out here.
Yeah, thanks, Linnell. And I want to also say thank you to the panelists. I felt like I had a good knowledge base about fundraising and board engagement, and I feel like we were kind of even talking amongst ourselves as we were listening that we were learning a lot from the panelists as well, so I hope that the participants found it as helpful as I did too, and that we provided information that was going to be really helpful for you to take back to your organizations. So I just wanted to make sure, like I always do, for the ones I'm on, to point out that there should be a very brief survey that pops up when you close the webinar. And just please, it's super brief. Take the time to fill it out. It really helps us track the webinar series and make sure that we continue to always kind of improve and get better and provide you with something that's really helpful. So that being said, have a wonderful rest of your day.